Okay, everyone, so for this lesson, we are going to look at fear and the finale in the French Revolution. So our objectives and standards describe how terror was used during the French Revolution and explain how the French Revolution came to an end. And of course, as usual, our standards are there. Vocabulary preview, guillotine and Jacobins. So once you think about this, what are some possible outcomes of revolutions? Revolutions are sometimes successful and sometimes they're not. So I want you to think about what are some of the outcomes of revolutions. And this could be applied to the American Revolution, or what you may know about the French Revolution, or even revolutions in the modern age. Okay? So our central question, how did the French Revolution come to an end and what was the outcome? All right. So the world watches. So as the French Revolution was going on in Europe at this time, and in France especially, monarchs and rulers across Europe and the world watched with fear the revolution going on in France. Many feared that revolutions would come to their own countries. Now, some countries are going to take action, such as Austria and Prussia, urged the French to restore Louis or Louis as king. So with France at war, so the Legislative Assembly responded to the request by Austria and Prussia by declaring war. So after this happens, Prussian forces are going to be very successful during the war, and they're going to march on Paris, and they threaten to destroy the city if the royal family was harmed. Now, the people of Paris obviously don't take to this. They respond by invading the palace where the royal family was, and they murder the palace guards, and they're going to imprison the royal family. So King Louis and Marie Antoinette, and I believe the children as well. I'm not quite sure what the children, but they're going to be imprisoned as well. So fear spreads. There were also rumors that prisoners who were loyal to the king were planning to break out and take control of Paris. So again, as citizens of Paris and of France learned of this, they become fearful and angry, and they went to prisons and murdered prisoners and others who they thought may be loyal to the king. Meanwhile, the Legislative Assembly took action to establish a new government. So the new government. So the Legislative Assembly put aside the Constitution of 1791 and enacted the following. They disposed of the king, so the king no more. He's just a normal, everyday person pretty much. They dissolved the assembly, and they called for an election for a new legislature. So a national convention. So this new legislative assembly is going to be called the National Convention. The National Convention abolished the monarchy and declared France a republic. This meant that all adult males were given the right to vote and hold public office. Now, what they failed to mention is, of course, women were not included in this as well. But the idea was behind the adult males were given the right to vote and hold public office. Most of the people in charge of this new government were called Jacobins. Now, the Jacobins were extreme revolutionaries, and they believed in the execution of those who supported the monarchy. So the rule of terror. So the new government decided to bring Louis XVI to trial for treason. They found him guilty and they're sentenced him to death. Now, by a slim margin, he is sentenced to death, but either way, he is sentenced to death, and he is executed on January 21st, 1793, by the guillotine. Okay, so here is a picture of the guillotine, okay? And many of you may have seen this or have, watched it in other movies or TV shows. We obviously don't use this anymore, but it was an execution device, especially during the French Revolution. And just to kind of give you an idea about how this works, the person would be led up the steps here, okay, up to the platform. Just kind of using my arrow here to show you. So they're brought up that way. And of course, the crowds would be gathered around here at the bottom, cheering and, maybe throwing items at them like fruit or things like that. But anyway, the person would be laid down on I don't know, I'm sure it has a certain name, but we'll call it like a pallet or a bench or a bed right now. Okay, they would lay there. Their head would go over here, where this hole is here, and I'm drawing it for you. Okay, their head would go there with the blue. There's a basket here. You can see right there, that's where the heads would fall. And this sharp blade here in green, I'm pointing to it now. You'll notice it has like an angle. It's not a straight blade. That was to make it like a quick, smooth cut. Not to be graphic, but it was supposed to make a quick, smooth cut so the person didn't feel anything. And then their head would fall into the basket. So that's how the guillotine basically worked. It was supposed to be quick and efficient. And it did kill many, many people during the French Revolution. It was, well known for this was the main tool by which many people were executed during the French Revolution, including King Louis XVI, excuse me, and his wife Marie Antoinette as well. Okay, so terror spreads. So one Jacobin who rose to power and took control of the government was Maximilien Robespierre, and his supporters were determined to wipe out the past in France. So they wanted to take all the history of France prior to the revolution and say, forget it, move on, let's erase it. As the leader of the Committee of Public Safety, he sought out those who had threatened the revolution, and he's going to basically have them executed. And this is going to become known as the Reign of Terror. No one was really safe from this. Rich, poor, old, young. It was a really scary time for people in Paris and across France. So like I was saying, so the end of terror. The Reign of Terror eventually turned to focus on the supporters of the revolution. So even people who had supported the revolution, if you didn't agree with Robespierre or his radical views, you were pretty much, sent to trial and executed. And like I said earlier, no one was spared, including the former Queen Marie Antoinette, and even peasants, people who had, stormed the Bastille and called for, revolution. Even some of these people are going to be, executed. Eventually, people are going to get tired of this, and the National Convention is going to call for the arrest and execution of Robespierre, and this reign of terror will end in July 1794 with his execution. So the end of revolution. So like I said, people had grown tired of the revolution after the death of Robespierre, so a new government is going to be created. It put power back into the hands of the upper middle class. It created a two-house legislature, and it's going to create an executive body of 5 men called the Directory. Now, we will talk about this later. The Directory does become a little corrupt, and creates its own issues, but for the time being, this seems to satisfy the people of France. Okay, so to wrap it up, so violence spread across France during the Revolution. Like I said, people went into prisons and murdered people who were supposed to be supporters of the king. They imprisoned the king and his family. And then with Robespierre and the Reign of Terror, this basically takes control of France, and many people are going to be executed. And like I said, it didn't matter if you were rich, young, old, poor. It didn't matter. With Robespierre, it was a very scary time. But the French Revolution does come to an end eventually after Robespierre is executed, and the legislature is going to establish a new government that seems to work for the French people for the time being. Okay? So with that said, please be sure you answer the questions, and be sure to do any other work that is required for this lesson, and I will talk or see you soon. Bye-bye.